Teachers of Reddit, what was the strangest encounter you've had with a student's parents? Story 1. I had a father, a very large man, who came up to my table and said, "So what do you want to tell me about that son of mine? I've already heard plenty of from everyone else." He looked very angry. Taking a breath, I told him what a wonderful student his son was and how respectful he was, and what a joy it was to have him in my class. He left seeming a bit skeptical. The next day, his son came to see me before school started and thanked me and said, "You are the only reason that my dad didn't come home and beat the out of me last night." I was shocked to learn as we talked that he was being abused regularly. I did turn the father into social services, and I later found out that the son went to live with his aunt. I also learned, many years later, that the boy had done well in school, went to the university, and is now working in a job he loves and has a loving family of his own. Moral of the story: teachers, be very aware when criticizing a student. Choose your words carefully. It could save a child from harm. Story 2. I had a student whose last name, which isn't a common one, seemed oddly familiar. His mom walked in at open house and I realized she's my gynecologist. Story 3. Not a teacher, but if I may relay a story. I was a rather hefty kid in junior high. My art teacher was a rather harsh individual who never tried to hide his thoughts. To be blunt, he was a bully to many students. He often made comments about my weight, which was pretty upsetting to say the least. One day, after a particularly nasty verbal attack, it involved calling me a human garburator, my parents decided it was time to confront him. They scheduled a meeting with the teacher and the principal, so I'm sitting there in the principal's office with my mom, stepdad, principal, and art teacher. The issue of his bullying is discussed. The art teacher looks at my mom and says something along the lines of, "Well, now I know where the fat comes from." Stepdad leaps to his feet. "Don't you dare talk about my family like that." Art teacher jumps up, goes toe-to-toe with my stepdad. "You have a problem hearing the truth?" Principal, "Gentlemen, can we please be rational?" Mom tries to get between stepdad and art teacher. Art teacher shoves mom out of the way. Stepdad is pissed. "How dare you touch my wife?" Art teacher shoves stepdad. "Do something about it." Stepdad breaks art teacher's nose. Story 4. I work with technology and education, and ran across this story from a teacher in the school where it happened. A second-grade boy is doing cartwheels in the middle of the class during reading. The teacher reached for the student before he cartwheels himself into a desk and potentially injures himself. The ring on the teacher accidentally scratches the child's arm but doesn't break the skin. When the student goes home, the mother notices the scratch, and the student tells his mother that the teacher scratched him on purpose because she was angry at him. The mother goes to the school, runs through the front office and down to the teacher's classroom. The insane mother grabs the teacher by her hair, beats the teacher's head into the desk multiple times. By the time the office staff chase her down, the lady runs out of the back of the school where her friend is waiting and they speed off to wherever. Teacher is left with A and broken nose. She had only been teaching as a second career for a few weeks. Story 5. I'm a sub, and I just had a strange situation yesterday. Not quite an encounter. I subbed for the same kindergarten class Monday and Tuesday. The plans made a note that Zaria, a sweet kid with severe disabilities, spina bifida, I think, shouldn't take her gloves and hat home but should leave them at school. But on Monday, I must have overlooked her putting them in her backpack in the chaos. This would usually just be parents leaving a set of gloves, sash, hat at school for convenience. No huge deal. Next day, the playground supervisor sends a kid to get Zaria's gloves and hat, and I looked. None in the room, none in the backpack. "I must have sent them home by accident yesterday," I said. "Oh no," said the playground helper. "We can't send her gloves and hat home. Her mom throws them away." My jaw hanging open, I couldn't help but ask for an explanation. "We live in an extremely cold state. Some parents just aren't completely with it, if you know what I mean," she said. I still can't get my head around it. I went out and bought a new hat and gloves and took them in today for Zaria, BTW. The nicest, prettiest ones I could afford. Story 6. Parent-teacher conferences. My first year, paid, teaching. Parent comes in, literally with 1 minute to go before we're off for the night. So we're chatting, and her daughter is a great student, so it's an easy conference. Then I feel something hit my head. Parent, mouse, me, looking around. Who is throwing a mouse at me? Parent. No, a real mouse. Look, she points at the ground and I see an actual, real-life mouse. I look up and see that it had dropped from a ceiling tile missing in the ceiling. It scurries underneath my coworker's desk. He is also having a conference with a parent. Somebody yells to him, "Mouse!" And he looks down, stomps the mouse with his boot, and continues the conference like nothing happened. Best part was at the next staff meeting, one of my coworkers gifted me a bike helmet covered in mouse traps for protection. Story 7. I had a kid once who was rather weird, very impulsive, odd sense of humor, aggravated the out of the other kids, very aspy. I met his mom at conference night and everything was explained. She was a close talker, continually did that phlegmy sinus snort thing every 10-15 seconds, and went on several conspiracy theory tirades that had nothing to do with anything that was being discussed. In 15 years of teaching, It was rare to meet a parent for the first time and not have all of the classroom concerns clearly explained. Story 8. I had a parent tell me I was obviously a racist and that it was clear to her that I was prejudiced against biracial people like her child. She absolutely tore me a new one about assigning her daughter detention for her constant tardies and refusal to do class or homework, and that I was obviously targeting her due to her heritage. I happily invited her in for a parent-teacher conference. I am Mexican, Italian, and the conference was right after I had gotten back from a cruise to the Bahamas. When I spend any time in the sun, I turn a delicious dark brown color, and along with my curly hair and very dark brown eyes, many people assume I am biracial. The parent came in, took one long look at me, turned around, walked out, and I never heard from her again. Story 9. High school English teacher. Here. Nothing beats my very first parent-teacher conference meeting ever. Important note, I live in a small island community. Everybody knows someone who knows you. People frequently ask for your parents' names in order to see if they are related to you or if they know you. I am 22 years old, about to have my first PTC, and I was super nervous. Finally, a parent comes up to me. So, you're Miss Rachel. Is your dad Miss Rachel's dad's name? Yes, sir. I remember you running around our apartment complex about this tall, indicates how tiny I was with his hand, with nothing but a diaper on. I was at a total loss for words. Edit. Forgot a word. Story 10. I once had a student who was not living up to his potential in class. This is high school, and I teach a media class focused on digital photography, graphic design, and video editing. During the editing portion of the year, the student, who had been excellent all year and had expressed massive interest earlier in the year regarding said portion, decided he didn't care anymore and turned in a quarter-assed project. I say quarter because this wasn't even half-assed. He failed. I was disappointed and told him I would give him another week to fix some of the mistakes and possible raise his grade as high as a C, which is passing. He accepted. A week goes by. Then when I ask him where his project is, his reply was, I didn't do it. That was fine. He received the failing grade. Not my problem, so I thought. The next week is parent-teacher conferences. Now, because I do not teach a core class per se, not a lot of parents feel the need to see how well their son or daughter is designing film posters or using the rule of thirds. However, the student in question arrived looking sullen at my door with his parents behind him. I welcomed them in and had them take a seat, but before the mother sat down, she went off on me. Who the do you think you are? You've ruined his entire GPA. This is the field he most wants into, and you are discouraging him with grades like this, etc., etc. I politely explained the situation to her and her husband to no avail. This was not their son's fault. He was only given an assignment and time frame. When that wasn't enough and I gave him a second chance on the field he most wants to get into, he declined to fix any mistakes and raise his grade. This is when the mother basically leans across the table into my face and says, all of you male teachers are the same. You only care about looking at these young girls. They get special treatment. I know you're kind. You make me sick. Now, at the time, this was my second year teaching, and being in my late 20s, I was one of the youngest males on the staff. I was pretty shaken by this because we all know how fine a line must be walked when dealing with accusations of this nature. I continued to listen to her rant for about 5 minutes, while her husband, who I actually kind of felt bad for, just sat silent with his head down. The student seemed completely unfazed by his mother's tirade, and just sort of smirked. She concluded with, you either give him another chance or regrade his project on equal terms. They went a few minutes over their allowed time, and I had another set of parents waiting in the hallway listening to all of this. After the madness settled and they left the room, the waiting parents came in and just said, wow. I was pretty uncomfortable, and I told them that it was a rare instance but apologized nonetheless. As they were the last visitors of the night, I immediately went to my superiors and told them what happened. It should be noted that the mother is a prominent member of the school board and also a teacher in the same district. Luckily, my principals backed me up as she had been belligerent to others as well. She never once apologized, and I had 3 more visits throughout the year with her. Now I cringe during PTAs, not because of a student's poor performance, but because we live in a day and age where the student is always right. I haven't changed the way I grade or teach, but this is a problem I encounter every year more and more frequently. TLDR. Mother of a student got in my face and accused me of being sexist towards students because her son earned a bad grade. Edit. Grammar. Story 11 I just posted about the one. But the joy of teaching is that there is no shortage of awkward moments. It was discovered that a female student was signing my last name on all of her schoolwork. We are not related. Needless to say, it was a big fucking deal. There were multiple meetings with the administration and the police to see if it was a sexual relationship. I had no idea any of this was even happening, as she wasn't even in my class anymore. Finally, they let me know about it. Once it became clear I had no idea what was going on, and that we were not in direct contact. The final meeting on the subject was with the principal, vice principal, guidance counselor, both parents, the student, and me. They ask her the million-dollar question. Why are you signing your last name as AskReddit? The student went into a very long emotional account of her parents' divorce, how she lost respect for both of them, and how she no longer wanted their name attached to hers. She chose mine, as I was the only respectable man in her life. All this while I am sitting next to the parents, about 90 minutes after I even learned about this situation. It was a crazy day. Story 12. My mom is a speech and language teacher in a very affluent area. Every teacher has to work with difficult parents, but my mom has the added luxury of these difficult parents being filthy stinkin' rich. A parent at her school had a kid who wanted to be in the annual talent show but failed to sign up. So his dad is actually suing the school because he believes that, because his child is in the special ED program, he was entitled to a place in the talent show, regardless of if he signed up on time or not. Please note, this kid has a speech impediment. That's it. He is fully functional mentally and 100% capable of signing up on time. Story 13. I was assisting as an early literacy teacher for ELL students from Mexico. There was this one little girl who would throw a tantrum if she didn't get her way and would look me right in the eyes as she would pour her drink on herself during breakfast. She was just seeking attention, but her behavior was so disruptive she wouldn't learn anything. She did other things that were not appropriate for a child of that age. We called her mother in to talk about the child's behavior. The mom walked in the next morning 15 minutes after class started and went on a rant about how we were starving her child because we took away her milk the previous morning. We told her what actually happened and explained that the child's attention-seeking behavior is disrupting her learning. I asked the mother to come back after school because she was now disrupting my lesson with the other students and she refused to leave. I quickly gave the class group assignments and went back to speak to the mother to just get it over with. I elaborated on the child's behavior during class and that she was obviously not getting enough attention at home. The mother started making excuses about how she doesn't have time for her daughter because she's working and has a boyfriend now. This pissed me off. She then called her daughter over and started threatening her by saying, if she misbehaves again, she's going to send her back to Mexico all alone, and no one will love her anymore, that she'll be abandoned in the streets like a dog. She then told the girl that she was going to take her to the bathroom and spank her until her is blue because the teacher says she's stupid and bad. She then started leading the girl out of the class to the bathrooms, and I grabbed the child back and told the mother she has to leave now. She said I better not call CPS and then left. I called administration, explained what happened, and they said they would handle CPS and everything else. I then took the girl aside and explained that she is not stupid or bad, hugged her, gave her a sticker, and let her draw for 1 to 2 an hour. Story 14. Not my story, but there's always Kevin's parents. Favorite being their trip to Nassau. Kevin and his parents took a trip to Nassau. How did they even get airline tickets? And forgot all their luggage at home. I didn't believe him when he told me until I talked to his mom, who told me first thing when I saw her at the bi-weekly meeting. Story 15. I am a male who teaches at the elementary level. I had a Ukrainian girl my first year of 5th grade. During parent-teacher conferences, the father said, enough of this academic business. In your opinion as a man, do you feel that my daughter will make a good wife someday? It was one of my first conferences ever, and it is still the weirdest so far. Story 16. Parent-teacher conferences. Girl had dropped my class a few weeks before because I'm a terrible teacher. Her dad sat down at my table and introduced himself, at which point I politely attempted to inform him that I was no longer his daughter's geometry teacher. Him. I know. I wanted to speak to you about your classroom management skills. Me. Him. My daughter said that your class is chaotic and that you can't control the room. Me. She's telling the truth. I remember having to speak to your daughter on multiple occasions about paying attention, taking notes, doing work, and not texting during class. Him. I know about the phone. She was texting me to tell me how bad the class was. Me. So you were encouraging her to break school rules and disrespect the teacher while distracting her from learning? Him. Story 17. Student teacher here. I was left alone in the classroom my first year of university. This was a huge no-no. But the classroom teacher trusted me and figured what could happen in the 5 minutes she went to the washroom. A child's father came in, assumed I was the substitute, and starts blatantly hitting on me in front of the class of 1st grade students. I blushed hardcore and explained I was just the student teacher. I left out the part where I was only 18 at the time during my explanation. He looked embarrassed, went to help his kid get ready to leave, which he should have been doing anyway, and then the regular teacher came back. Apparently, I still looked shell-shocked because the regular teacher pulled me aside and asked what happened. Best part? The classroom teacher told me he was still married to the boy's mother. Story 18. I had a kid feel sick and went to the nurse. They tried calling home, jock work, job cell numbers, but either no one answered or the mailbox was full. So when school was dismissed, he was sent home. Mom was pissed and stormed in the next day with a Ziploc bag full of vomit to prove he had been sick. This was not the only time we had to threaten to call the police to remove her. Story 19. Big dude, ponytail, biker jacket, Harley rider, scruffy, looked the type to be in a motorcycle gang. Came into my classroom in my first year of teaching. Generally, these kinds of guys don't show up to parent-teacher nights, right? So when they do, you just have to take a deep breath. It didn't really start well. "Are you the guy that's teaching my daughter?" he said, in that low, kinda throaty growl. Sounded like the bike he rode, I guess. What could I do but answer as professionally as possible? "Yes, your daughter is a student in my Canadian history class. I have her marks here if you—" "Yeah, not right now. She's been incredibly afraid of tests, exams, and school. But for some reason, she never misses your class. Always tells me about it. I don't know how you're doing it, but she really likes your class." It was my first year of teaching. This student and a few other kids had serious test phobia. In particular, she would freeze up, start crying. Serious anxiety issues about a test. So, I wanted to help her out, and I let her write tests at lunch, where she could eat. There was nobody but me around, and I would watch over her. Say things like, "You studied this, remember? We made notes on it for your study guide." Insurance policy on my part. Students get an extra 5% if they create and hand in study notes before the test. In about 90% of the cases, the 5% bonus is unnecessary. They tend to do better by dint of making the notes anyway, along with getting her make her own test. I'm not kidding. I let her write her own questions to the test. Long answer questions mostly. I also had a fondness for tea when I was teaching, so if she was overwhelmed, she was allowed to make tea and think about her answers. By the end of the semester, she was a different girl. No more test phobias from her or a group of other students. Still, that big dude coming into my classroom and how quickly the situation turned 180 is pretty memorable for me. Edit. Yes, I miss teaching. Pretty badly. I'm glad so many of you wished for a teacher like me and are happy with what I did. That makes me feel great. But I feel like I should be a little more humble here and point out that I made a bunch of mistakes as a teacher. And there are most assuredly a good number of students who thought I was a terrible teacher. The really good teachers are the ones who took me, the completely new teacher, under their wing and said, "This is how you manage a class. These are some tips to help your students pass. Here's how you talk to parents." Teachers like Tim, Doug, Betty, and Julie, who are still teaching today, who have had thousands of students pass through their classrooms and still stay past the bell to listen to students, talk to guidance to see how kids are doing, and juggle marking and lesson planning, field trips, professional growth, and mentoring the panicky new birds who are just jumping into their own classrooms with gentle words like, "Yes, that lesson was terrible, but they'll forget all about it tomorrow. You should too. Keep moving on." I loved teaching, but the teachers who inspired me deserve the credit. Story 20. My first grade teacher would have probably told about my mother's first parent-teacher conference about me. The way my mother told it, the teacher told her that I was having a hard time learning how to read. My mother couldn't help bursting out in hysterical laughter. When she got herself under control, she told my teacher that I had been reading books since I was 4, that I went to the town library and checked out adult books to read, that I definitely did not have a problem learning to read. Mom came home and asked me why I hadn't told the teacher that I could read. I told her that she hadn't asked me. Then I told her that I thought that I could not go to school and do all right. With my twin sisters at home, that was not even an option. Next day, 3 strange adults took me out of class. I had no idea of what was going on. They gave me a newspaper and had me read an article and tell them what it said. Then they gave me a magazine which was a little harder to understand. Then they gave me a book. When I went back to class, I was excused from reading class. I would take books to school and read them. I was the shy hillbilly kid that constantly had my classmates correcting my pronunciation. I spoke fluent redneck, but radio English was my first foreign language. When I suddenly became teacher's pet, they became a lot nastier. They didn't so much bully me as constantly correct my pronunciation. When we moved at the end of the year, they had taught me radio English. Story 21. I have a teacher friend who was ranted, or screamed by one of her students' father during an open house with all of her students and their parents around. The dad totally lost it and yelled in her face, called her a communist, and ended up storming off. My friend was a kindergarten teacher. He was berating her after she explained that at her school they teach their students to share art supplies. Story 22. I had to tell a mom that we couldn't let her son in the school because he wasn't cleared medically. The kid had a heart condition and was often aggressive enough to be put in physical restraints. So we needed the doctor note to say he was healthy enough to be put in one. Well, he shows up without one, so I call mom and say we can't let him in. She goes nuts and says, "Do I need to come down there and go black woman on your—" I responded by saying that she was now threatening me, and that if he didn't get picked up, we would have to call the police and say she was neglecting him. I then hung up. Story 23. I had a parent get mad because I gave her kid an F on a paper. Don't you know that can hurt their self-esteem? My response of, well, maybe he should have done the work, didn't diffuse the situation. She threatened to go to the school board, the mayor, and the superintendent in that order. Story 24. Taught 3rd grade. A long time ago, when teachers were allowed to run their classrooms, and mornings before school were a time when the kids and teachers talked a lot. We also played all kinds of games, and got pretty wild sometimes. Did I say there were 48 kids in a class? Anyway, a parent comes into a parent-teacher conference and tells me what her child told her happens in my class. The story was quite exaggerated, so I looked her squarely in the eyes and said slowly, "You believe half of what your child says happens in my class, and I will believe half of what your child says happens at home." Never had another parent complain. Story 25. Not a teacher, but my mother has been one for 20 years. So at their house growing up, I have heard a lot of stories. At an after-school conference, a student's parents wanted my mother to stop giving homework in the middle of the week. Not because it was difficult or due to the kid playing sports. That's another story. But because on Wednesday nights, that was when their family went to the local Walmart and spent 3 to 4 hours in the store. Not shopping or getting groceries. They just walked around. A normal family outing for them. Story 26. This is straight up accused my parents of oversized gold-plated paperclip thievery. Not a teacher, but my parents had a surreal encounter with one of my teachers. This woman called everyone Oscar, including the plant, called us tubs of lard, or as stupid as tubs of lard. She would make one poor student her each month and demand they fetch things for her, like the whiteout that's already on the desk she is currently sitting at. Anyway, I told my parents about halfway through the school year, and they schedule a conference. She denies everything, but she's so flustered that it's obvious she's lying. And my parents make it clear that if this continues, they'll go to the administration. My dad says that at this point, she basically starts having a manic episode, moving quickly around the room, talking a lot and straightening things. So my parents leave. Later that morning, once classes are about to start, a girl from the teacher's, homeroom class comes in to talk to me. "Sister wants to know if your parents stole her paperclip." I said no, and thought that was that, except it wasn't. I had 2 classes taught by her that day, and she harassed me before and after the first class and during the second class about where her paperclip was, and why wouldn't I just give it back. I even went home and asked my parents if they could somehow have accidentally taken it, and we searched everywhere. She kept on me about it for the rest of the year. My sister had her 2 years later. Same problems. That was her last year at our school, though. She got pulled and sent to teach ESL to adults in the city. Story 27. Throwaway. Because I do not need lawsuits. So I taught in a fancy, expensive boarding school for a decade. Here are some stories. A kid got kicked out for selling pot to his classmates. His parents came to pick him up. Dad was stoned. I guess we all know where he got his merchandise from. Once a mom called at like 2 a.m. yelling through the phone, "My son is gonna kill himself. Please make sure he is alive." I just went, "YTF?" Checked on the kid and he was fine. Mom said, "Oh, but he didn't take his meds this morning, and if he doesn't take his meds, he'll kill himself." Turns out that he had severe anxiety and depression and was prescribed some heavy-duty, abuse-prone antidepressants. The parents told neither of those things to us before sending him across the country to a boarding school. Worse, state law and common sense required us to lock up the meds and administer them because we're legally responsible for both him and the medication. We don't want him to skip taking the meds or for other kids to steal and sell the meds. Even worse, his mom has been sending him the meds in unmarked over-the-counter pill bottles through postal mail. So anyway, while he lived in my dorm, his mom would regularly call me in a panic whenever she thinks that he didn't take his meds. That was a fun year. One more that isn't mine. One day a dad gave my female coworker a giant pile of sausages, like Italian sausage, Polish sausage, just meat sticks of all kinds. Turns out he owned a sausage factory, and he shows gratitude by giving people freezers full of sausages. She called me over and we had a giant sausage party. Story 28. I had a conference once with a divorced couple and their new spouses. They insisted on having one conference instead of 2. It was clear that the wounds hadn't yet healed, especially because Dad's affair with stepmom was the reason for the divorce. They spent the whole conference arguing about who was screwing up their kids more. So awkward. Story 29. Throwaway. In case they are on Reddit. I caught 2 students viewing on the cell phone of one of the students. I wrote them up, and one of the mothers came to a parent-student-teacher meeting. In said meeting, she demanded to view the video in question. I told her I didn't know what it was, and that it was a bad idea in general. She went through the kid's history on his phone browser. What kind of amateur doesn't clear history? Until the 3 of us had the pleasure of viewing together as a team. It was beyond awkward. Story 30. I once taught a kid that, looking back on it, probably had some mental issues. I say looking back because the mother had opted her son out of special ed after various referrals and suggestions that mentioned his type of behavior and learning style. This kid was fairly smart but had absolutely no social skills. He would often stop an assignment halfway through because he deemed that it was reading time. I digress. One of his biggest problems was so simple it frustrated me to the end of the earth. He couldn't be bothered to bring a pencil to class, ever. Whenever he needed a pencil, he would basically shout out, "I need a pencil." These interruptions happened in the middle of a lesson, a math problem, etc. It bugged most of the students who wanted to learn, but it also frustrated me, having to stop the entire class to help the kid get his writing utensil. I, along with other classmates, gave him numerous pencils, pens, even crayons for fuck's sake. Not a day went by where he asked for a pencil. After a good 2 months of pencil specialist type work, I gave up and told him that he needed to get his pencil himself. At this point, I had given him multiple boxes of pencils and a few pens. I was done donating my dwindling class budget on pencils. I simply told him that, if you don't find a pencil, I guess you won't be able to complete your work. I knew well that he wouldn't finish the assignment, but assumed that he would later when his mom saw the 0% that he would naturally receive. Later the next week, his mom bursts into the door while I am teaching another class. Semi-shocked, I greeted her and gave out the assignment to my class, telling her that I would be with her in a moment. As I went to the hallway to talk, not a new thing with this lady, I noticed her face was a slightly more contorted than usual. She was always unhappy, but I could tell that this time she meant business. I barely gotten a word before she yelled, "Why do you let my son fail his assignment for no reason? He is a great child. Smarter than those idiots in the classroom." I remember saying something along the lines of, "I didn't have any spare pencils to loan him. He has used over 30 pencils in my class." She decided that she was done talking to a simple peasant and left to talk to the principal. I returned to my classroom and went on teaching. I later get a note from the principal asking me to make a special accommodation for the kid in question. It informed me that it was now my sole duty to get the kid a pencil. I was pissed, but also shocked by my coworker's behavior. I guess he was sick of the mothers too. Not wanting to spend my entire class budget on one child, I came up with the amazing idea of tying a pencil to the kid's desk. I contemplated how I was going to do this, due to the fact that the pencil is inherently slick and easily breakable. After long thought over the break, the next Monday I made my move. Using a potent amount of super glue and reinforced string, I tied the pencil to one of the support bars on the desk. Sure, it was limiting, but it was better than giving him a pencil every day until the end of the year. I never once had another incident with pencils, which is something that I cherish every day. Story 31. A student's parents contacted me to discuss his lab report grade. Context: I was a TA for pre-med physics at university, usually taken in the second or third year. I think as a rule, I should never have any contact with a student's parents without that being super strange. Lucky me, at least I could just refer them to the professor and not have to deal with them. Story 32. I teach third grade. One of my kids, who made A's on nearly everything, had gotten an 87 on a creative writing assignment. The morning of the day after I passed the papers back to them, she came up to me looking a little embarrassed and said her mom was going to come in around noon to talk to me about the grade. Past teachers had warned me that this girl had a helicopter mom, but I hadn't had any bad experiences with her yet, and we were a couple months into the school year. Sure enough, right as the lunch bell was about to ring, the door bursts open and in storms, "Helicopter Mom." She looked furious. I could tell she was about to lay into me in front of my entire class, but then a piercing metallic shriek hit my ears. One of her rotors had clipped the wall and she just started falling apart and spinning out of control. A rotor flew across the room and killed 2 and injured 3, and then she crashed into our terrarium and burst into flames, killing the class's pet frog Scooter, and shrapnel from the wreckage peppered the front row of kids. R.I.P. Scooter edit. Yup, it's copy pasta. Pretty sure saw it on 4chan a few years ago and remembered it hiding away somewhere in my hard drive. Edit. Wow, someone else saw the same post, I guess. Story 33. Not me, but a guy I know took his son to a parents' evening and later remarked to his dad that it was really awkward when they saw one of his teachers. His dad replied, "Yeah, we used to. She's got huge nipples." Story 34. I was teaching a study abroad course in France and 2 American women trashed a hotel room. These women rubbed feces all over the walls, left used tampons on their beds, left broken glass from wine bottles all over the floor. Obviously, I started the process to have them removed from the program when we returned from the excursion. After meeting with the girls and telling them I would be kicking them out, I received about 8 or 9 phone calls from their parents telling me that I would be sued when I returned to the US if I kicked them out. There I was in France having the parents of 2 20-something-year-old women tell me that nothing is wrong with their grown daughters shitting all over hotel walls. They literally thought I should not have been angry. Finally, my boss's boss stepped in and threatened to fire my boss if he proceeded with any discipline. I still had them kicked out of the residence that they lived in. Turns out the father of one of the women was a major donor to the university I worked for. Turns out that even though money may not be able to buy you happiness, it will allow you to get away with painting other people's walls in.